our list here, which is used to build our building. If I close this, a few settings, depending on how you have your floor set out, it may be a little bit different in height. The floor off, this is pretty much a floor offset for the furniture to make sure that it lifts furniture up high enough to where it's not protruding through the floor. And I have not used the actual manual settings for building a building in a while, so that may or may not work, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of the uses for this is geared toward the actual layout manager and to load the prefab data to actually build the building. So that's the main usage of it now. I may remove the manual aspect of building a building later, but for right now it's still there. I just haven't used it since I initially created it, and everything else has been geared towards loading prefab data. So now I've actually split this up to where I can load the prefab from the actual default folder. Once it's loaded, I can see all the buildings. 0 is none, so no buildings. And then 1 through 8 are my options to be able to load the prefab information. I can see the dimensions of the prefab right here in this drop down, so I can know how big I can get a good sense on the square meters or square centimeter cube size that the actual building is. For the definition of an actual given tile, by default, with the template that I have for the modular parts, each modular part is 400 by 400 by 400 height for the height, width, and ceiling height for my pieces, and everything for that tile has to fit with the same dimensions for it to piece all the modular pieces together properly. If that is not off, then you may get things you may get gaps in between floors, between tiles, and things like that. But as long as you set up the modular pieces correctly, it will put them together properly. I'm going to start with making sure that our rotation is actually set to 0, 0, 0. This is mainly because when I actually build a building, I use the actual general offsets that's in the world to be able to move the tiles up, left, right, however they need to be placed to be able to build the tile next to each other. I tried to base it off the actual world rotation of the object, and it just messed up the calculations for some reason. So right now, when you build a manual building by itself, you have to make sure that the rotation is zeroed out. So now that I've actually loaded the information, if I go up to the desired prefab, and I'm going to try to find the actual mention. So let's go with mention 3. I think that's the one that I've initially started with. And click prefab. Actually, that's the wrong one. So I'm going to actually clear that data. Do I have to bake it first? Okay, I have to bake it first. So after I bake it, then I can go back and clear it. So I'm going to try this again. Let's go to the second building. I want to create the prefab. So that's our mansion. Once the prefab is created, you can actually go in here and make minor alterations. So if things aren't the way that you like it, you can modify it however you please. So say for instance, here I don't like these windows, for these external windows. Since I have another set for the actual external window, I can go through here, and I want to make sure I'm dealing with the external part of the modular piece, and I want to change this from this external window to the wide window. And I can go through and modify this and change this to the wide window. And now they've been switched out with these windows that are on the bottom floor, which are the secondary external windows. And if I like my modifications, I can now go through and let's select the main building that these are actually attached to. And if I can find it. And now we're going to bake our information, which is going to take every single individual instance of the meshes, is going to scan through our entire building, find every unique mesh. So even if there's something that's was thrown in as an oddball, it's going to find each individual mesh that makes up this entire building. It's going to keep the location of each individual mesh piece, delete all of the standard tiles that made up all those individual layers, and then recreate the building with instant static meshes to make sure that the building is as optimal as possible when trying to actually keep this in the level. Otherwise, it would have been even heavier trying to have a building with all this information, all the static meshes everywhere, and little bitty piece and chunks. One other reason I've created this is to make sure that I can actually make a building without having to manually put one together, which can still be done, but I don't have that patience, and I found it easier just to program this to help me make a building. It may not be the best design, but my idea is that I want to put more effort in the actual game mechanics of the system. Don't delete this. Into the actual game mechanics of the system versus trying to figure out how I'm going to make a building that will probably be used once and only once within the whole game. That being said, with these actual pieces, it's assumed that I can make different types of buildings. So if I wanted a medieval building, I can go through and make the architectural to where the architecture fit the theme of a medieval building, and I can still use the same plans and recreate this building and have it look medieval versus something that's kind of modern. But that was the whole idea of the building generator. So now we have our building here. We also have, in place of all of our doors, a smart object. Right now, I only have support for a smart object for the actual main 3 doors. So I have main door, inside door, and sliding door. The smart objects are used to replace a given mesh instance. So before having the actual smart objects, if I would have baked this house, the door would have just been a static door. I wouldn't be able to open it or anything like that. To solve that problem, I made it to where you could actually replace the door with a blueprint object. This blueprint object can be selected. It can be modified with any kind of logic that you want to actually operate. If you want to lock certain doors or have certain doors only open within certain times, you can do that. If you want to replace the door with something else that's completely different than an initial mesh that is replaced, you can do that as long as it matches up with the building. I made these doors to where they have a detection range. Once you go within that actual collision, it's going to automatically open the door for you. It's going to wait for you to exit, and then once you exit, it's going to time out and then close the door back behind you. This can be used by NPCs, even though right now my door actually blocks the nav mesh to prevent NPCs from trying to walk back and forth in areas where you actually want your characters to only be able to go through. But if I remove the can affect nav mesh, you can easily have this operate to where your NPCs could be going in and out of buildings and things like that. What this actually does create is if you dropped an NPC either outside or inside, it would kind of be trapped within the region of the doors, since the doors actually block the nav mesh right now. One other thing that I want to see if I can add, I might try to see if I can add it in the initial release, but if not, I'll probably create a tutorial on how to add in another additional smart object. But I want the actual lights for the internal buildings to be smart objects, so that way if you want to change the mood of a light, the strength, the attenuation, and things like that, it can actually be something that spawns an actual light. Right now, these are just static meshes with materials on them to make it seem like a light, but they don't actually affect it. They don't actually affect the environment. They just appear like lights and give a false sense of lighting in an environment where there really is no lighting. I think that may be all for the building generator. If I just play my map. I probably need to smooth out the terrain under here to actually match the building. But I can walk up to the building. The door is open. I can come in here, look around, see the furniture that was set within like the blueprints. Zoom into my character so I'm not clipping through walls or anything. So let's see. The next thing that we can show is we have characters. We have a character. It loads. We have a title screen. It loads to our default loading location. We've gone over adding a building. I can add a path real quick, which probably will take up the rest of the time for this, but it's pretty similar to what we just did for this building. So I'm actually going to delete this building. So now that everything's baked, I can just do clear data. It cleans up all the objects connecting to it and delete that. So now I'm going to create an actual path going from here all the way over here of buildings for our city or town, whatever you want to call it. So now we have our initial path. We can stretch this out. Right there should be good. I can add a spline point. I'm controlling the wrong part of the spline. There we go. I need to add some more slots to our road so it's not awkwardly bending. Bring this to the front of the town. So I can fix this angle of the road. I'm trying to keep it center somewhat to this whole area so it's not too crazy. I want to keep the road kind of curved. And I'll just have the city in here going into the trees. Push that down. Push this down. Got about 5 minutes left. That should be enough time. So now that I have my path set up, I can come in here and load my building settings. Now, by default, it's going to load every single building template that we have in here. We don't want that because, as we can see, we have some buildings that are just oddly shaped or just too big because they're templates for individual buildings that aren't meant for cityscape, kind of townscape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our prefab list, and I'm actually going to look at the name of the buildings real quick. Actually, I can see that from here. These are the building dimensions. I thought I had it to where you can see the actual file names of the loaded buildings, but maybe that only works for the building generator side to actually see the file names that are loaded. I probably should add that so you can easily see the file names of the buildings that you're going to generate inside this area. But let's go down to the folder. Let's go to the content. Sorry if this is sounding really loud on the microphone. My brain cut off. Let's see. Data, building layouts. So everything that I actually want to use for an actual town has the preset name of home. So that way, Hunter's building should not be on their store. I probably want to place stores manually and not have them randomly spawn within like the path of a city block. So I'm just going to add home to my filter, and that way it can only load the buildings for everything that is a standard home for this path. So all I have to do is add in home, all caps, and just leave that. And now load up my settings, and now everything looks kind of right. I think the spacing is okay for the defaults. These proxies give you a simulated area of the actual, including dead space. It gives you the actual dimensions of the building without showing all the little parts that makes up the building. So you can approximate how much space you're going to have in between buildings and things like that. These little spline points that you see in between are going to be used to flatten the terrain around the buildings so you don't have floating buildings. And so if you have buildings that are going uphill, it can actually mold the terrain going uphill to give a good kind of stair step in between buildings, and then also a smooth road transition in between the buildings to keep the uphill slopes proper. I might actually show that. Is there a place where I can have a proper increase in terrain? I'll just do that. That should be able to show something, especially right here where we have a little block that seems like the slope will go up pretty dramatically when we actually try to bake this. So that way when you come into the city, we should go up, over, and down, and everything should work. So now I'm just going to take this at face value. I'm not going to change any of the building spaces just yet. I'm actually looking to see if I overwrite any. Am I hitting any of the trees that's in the terrain? Move this over a little bit, that over. That should work for the most part. I'm almost out of time. So for right now, I am going to generate the building. And I'm gonna wait for it. All right, so now we have all our buildings. Don't worry about the frames per second. That's because we just created a crap ton of geometry and it's freaking out a little bit trying to keep track of all of it. So now you have all your individual buildings, all your pieces. You can go in here and make modifications like we did with the individual building. I'm going to come in here and bake this down. And that may take a while, so I'm going to end the video here. Well, it's done. Okay, that didn't take a while. But I'm going to end the video here and continue the rest of this in the next video.